But let's start it off with remembering John Sykes, who tragically and sadly passed away at the age of 65. He died from cancer, according to the reports out there. And John Sykes is one of those guitar players that, he didn't play on a ton of albums, but everything he played on was just phenomenal in a lot of these bands that he was in. So I'm going to talk about more of his impact and how people, essentially really view him. A lot of guitar players really love this guy. He really had a tremendous influence on a lot of people. And I fully believe that this guy is actually one of the most influential guitar players that I've ever heard. And if you ask a lot of people that play guitar, many of them were actually influenced by the stuff that he played. So I'm going to really quickly go over my top 5 albums that John Sykes played on. And I'm going to talk about those records. Let's start with number 5, Tigers of Pantang and the album Crazy Nights. That'll be number 5 on my countdown of the top 5 albums. And this is a good album. This is one that really does get overlooked because so many people love the Spellbound album, which I do think is better than Crazy Nights, and it is on this list. But Crazy Nights is a really, really great record. And it is the 3rd Tigers of Pantang album, and it was the 2nd full-length album that John played on. Now, there is an album that came out after this where he played on a couple of tracks, but Crazy Nights is essentially the last full-length album that John played on with Tigers of Pantang before he joined Thin Lizzy. So this record is very, very good, highly underrated, highly overlooked, but there is definitely a lot of great stuff on this album. Album number 4, the self-titled Blue Murder album. John sings on this. This was a record produced by Bob Rock, and he had a lot of really, a lot of support from the record company, it felt like, going back and looking back on this album. But for whatever reason, it never caught on. This was one of those records that was great, received a lot of great reviews, but it really was not an album that really ended up going mainstream. It has a cult following, and for good reason. I mean, it's a brilliant record. It just, for whatever reason, the mainstream audience didn't really catch on to it, and it didn't sell a ton of copies. But the people that do like the album absolutely love it, and I would consider this an outstanding record. And John Sykes and his playing, and even his singing, because I think he's actually a pretty good singer, were brilliant on this record. Carmen Appice plays the drums on it. He does a brilliant job, and a criminally highly underrated and sometimes forgotten album. Album number 3 on the countdown of my top 5 albums John Sykes played on is Spellbound by Tigers of Pantang. Believe it or not, this is the first full-length album I ever heard him play on. Now, I definitely had heard the Whitesnake album, the 1987 album by Whitesnake, but I had only heard songs on the radio. I hadn't heard the actual full-length album itself. Now, with that being said, I remember getting a copy of Spellbound. I found it in a CD store, like a used CD store in the 90s when I was in high school. Totally blown away by that album, and I still, to this day, I still go back and listen to it quite often. But if you're looking to hear what John did in Tigers of Pantang, this is the album you want to buy first. And then also get Crazy Nights. You should get both of them, but Spellbound, if you're going to pick between the 2 albums he played on, Spellbound is the one you want to pick. Album number 2 on my top 5 albums John Sykes played on is it's the album Thunder and Lightning by Thin Lizzy, which contains probably my favorite guitar solo that Sykes ever played. And it's in basically the title track of the album, first song in the album. Just an outstanding record. And, it's sad because he joined that band really, didn't have a long tenure there, obviously, because Phil Lynott is no longer with us and he passed away. But I can tell you that this record is one of the most outstanding albums I think I've ever heard from a guitar playing perspective. Is it my favorite Thin Lizzy album? Probably not, but it's definitely up there, and John's guitar playing and the solos he plays are just ridiculously awesome. If you ask a lot of guitar players, many of them would say that the solo in Thunder and Lightning is one of the hardest guitar solos John Sykes ever did, one of the hardest guitar solos to play. So that would be number 2 on my list. And number 1 on the list, and this should not surprise anybody, is the self-titled Whitesnake album, or as some people call it, the Whitesnake 1987 album. John played all the guitars on this. Hands down, probably one of the most influential albums ever. A lot of guitar players that love John's playing think that this is the best work he ever did. I would agree with that. And I mean, here's the thing. David Coverdale has always brought in very, very extremely talented people when it comes to the lineups he's brought into Whitesnake. And that is from the start of Whitesnake all the way until the present. I mean, there's so many great guitar players this man has had in his band over the years. The old Bernie Marsden, Mickey Moody duo I thought was great. Obviously, you had Sykes in the band. Reb Beach was in the band, Doug Aldrich, Steve Vai, Adrian Vandenberg. I mean, you can go through a whole lineup of not just guitar players, but musicians that Coverdale has had in Whitesnake. And I think it's important to talk about that and recognize that because for me, and I recognize that all these guys are talented, John Sykes is the best guitar player I think David Coverdale ever had. And the 1987 Whitesnake album, I believe, is still the biggest selling album they have ever had. And it's just brilliant from start to finish. When they came out with the box set for this record, I got excited. I went out and bought it, and that was probably a few years back. But definitely one of the most brilliant albums ever recorded. And John's solos on songs like Still of the Night and Crying in the Rain. I mean, everything he played on that record turned to gold. So those are my top 5 John Sykes albums. I'm curious as to what all of you think. What are your favorite albums by John? What are your favorite songs that he played on? What's your favorite album that he played on? I'd love to hear, or I'd love to see what you all have to say, and leave a comment and let me know what your favorite John Sykes album is. So sad to see him gone, but the man definitely left his mark on the music world. Hey everybody, Tony here from the Metal Command podcast. Again, I appreciate your support. Since 1998, I have hosted this show in one form or another, starting off in radio and now in the podcast format. Again, thanks for watching, and if you like what you see and hear on this show, by all means, please hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video, and if you see this program on any other form of social media, please give me a follow there. Again, I always appreciate your support.